Something that's really unique and special about you as a facilitator is that your background is that you come from, like, I don't know, decades in the medical world. And then you've been like a bridge in bridging from medical science to spiritual and somatic work. And I just love to invite you to speak a little bit about how your background in the medical world has impacted who you are as a facilitator and the spaces that you hold.
It's interesting because I've been asked that for many years now, and I notice how over time, the response is at its core, it's the same, but then there's been kind of changes. So firstly, basic having anatomy understanding, having understanding of bodies, having understanding of disease. And ironically, I was working in vascular surgery where it was about blood flow through veins and arteries. And we were looking for blockages and narrowings with mainly ultrasound and different types of sound and imaging equipment using energy. And then it kind of come to working with people's bodies and emotional energy flow, sexual energy flow, chakra system, energy field flow. So there was something in that from looking inside bodies for years. And I spent quite a bit of time in operating theatres as well. So physically looking inside through images. So when I started to work with people and their bodies and their systems, there was like a whole bunch of information and things that I had from that time. The other main piece was I was working directly with patients. So many scientists work primarily with test tubes, but I was working with humans in research or in clinical work. So I had to learn how to take history from people to make people feel comfortable. Sometimes these people had been in traumatic accidents. Sometimes they're about to have amputations. Sometimes they just had a stroke. So working with people in very high, volatile, scary, intense situations. And so I think that gave me a level of familiarity and some level of, I was going to say confidence, but it's not like in an overconfident way, or competence, or like my field, like my body, my own nervous system can feel solid in meeting quite intense situations where people are in fear or they're in the unknown, or there's a real, danger to their health. And being able to be with that. And to being able to stay in communication and as much as I can help them to navigate that in that moment. So I feel there's the other piece, which became so obvious to me actually a few years in when I did a training with an amazing woman called Elaine Yonge, who works with sex board trainers, who did this training on pelvic health, women's scar tissue remediation. But actually she's looking at disease through the biochemical, the postural, the emotional. And I realized that I was seeing people who were towards the end of the scale of a disease, usually with severe vascular disease, with severe renal disease. And somehow the people in the stages we're working with where the emotions are there and the stress, if you want to call it traumas in life, the challenges, and how the biochemistry of this and the psychology and the emotional energy translates into dis-ease in its various form. So I felt like there's a continuum, and I had kind of seen it in reversed, where I was coming to meet people whose bodies were starting to show signs or whose systems were starting to show signs of lack of balance, as opposed to, and another important factor, I feel and I believe that we're animals, we're made of cells, and sometimes disease just happens and things just dysfunction. So I don't think the entirety of everything is related. And I really dislike the idea that we are calling in physical things for our lessons. I'm not a fan of that approach. So sometimes stuff just happens, but a lot of things to do with unresolved challenges, unresolved emotional challenges, physical challenges, traumatic experiences, constant fear, stress, adrenaline, cortisol over the long term, definitely I feel are the contributors to a lot of the disease that we see, and disconnection from the body, lack of fitness in the body, lack of care, lack of being able to listen. So that's a bit of a long answer to that question, but like there's multiple threads through which I feel it has informed and is still part of what I do now.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. I'm actually having a moment of feeling I really get the connection for you and for all facilitators of really understanding the biology and the medical insight that you get to have when you work with people in health related situations and life or death situations, and the blockages and how that shows up, and how you're more adept and skilled at being able to understand what people need from a health perspective, or what to meet on an emotional perspective. You've talked a lot about energy work, and I know that your energy work training is like one of your, I think every person I've ever spoken to who's done your energy work training is just like singing your praises. It's one of your top transmissions. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how you got into energy work, like from the medical world to that. How did you get there?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we're maybe at some point going to speak about what is science, you know. So as a medical scientist, where does that place me in relation to spirituality, but also where does that place me in relation to the older style energy practices? So I was fortunate enough to meet people who used energy work in what would be neo-tantra practices, people who were connected to some of the Taoist traditions, some of the yogic traditions. And actually, thankfully for me, everything that I did was mainly experiential. And I was fortunate to go to places and have experiences with people who weren't trying to convince my cynical, skeptical mind. And I was the biggest cynic and skeptic in the room. And that's why I love having those people in my spaces. I always say, you're like totally welcome, you know, please bring it. You know, so I was not sitting going, you will never convince me. But I was like,
Yeah.
You know, like, a little suspicious. And then, you know, people throwing around terms around quantum physics and things in a way it doesn't totally make sense to justify energy work. And so I was sitting there but what really mattered was when I and other people practice these practices under guidance and together, something strong and powerful happened. So there was a stage when my mind and my cognitive brain could not understand. But I believed based on my own experience and the experience of others. So I mainly started doing energy work in deep experiential practices. And I just thought, I'm not even going to ask the question too much about why or what or where, because I can feel this is true for me. I can feel it in my body, in my system. I don't even know how many thousands of people I've taken in who know nothing about energy into group spaces and in retreats and festivals, and people, particularly the engineers, are always the ones that are super surprised, you know, because they're the biggest cynics out there, and people have these experiences. So I then, after a while of experiential, I then was like, okay, let me go and have a little look and try and understand a little more. So then I went to look at the sort of Chinese medicine system, the sort of Taoist practices, the kind of chakra systems. And I mean, these have such wisdom and edge. They most of them stand up to the rigor of today's examination. And then I noticed when you take their energy systems and you map them onto the physiology in the endocrine system, particularly the chakra system, there's all these correlations. So I started to understand, okay, these energy centers are actually close to endocrine glands, which we know release major hormones which bring around changes, whether that's DMT in the pineal gland, or, you know, the energy and of the thymus gland related to the heart chakra. So all through the system. And in more recent years, I've turned to this Human Institute of Energy Studies, where they're looking at the measurement of the human energy field. Because when I work with energy, there's like the internal systems, and then there's like the field around us. And so there's quite a lot of work and research done into like the layers of energy field, and particularly also heart math, which is a great institute that looks at the magnetic energy of the heart and that particular field. And at one point they showed that things were detected in this field before they were detected by the brain, which is quite incredible.
Wow.
So in when I was first doing the energy course, I remember thinking, okay, maybe I should be prepared to do some lectures and information, you know, for people who want to understand. So I had some things to do. And the first time I ran a week long, I said to people, you know, we'll do these practices, and then if you want to know more of the theory, we can go into it. And I had my projector and slides and things. And in 7 days, I never even put a single slide up or went into any of the theory, because they understood, and I understood that actually the thing was to practice it, and they could go away and read about it later. But sometimes it's not always possible to do that. Sometimes you need to give the mind, depending on the group and the space, a certain amount of information before the body, the system will surrender to have an experience, you know.
Wow, so beautiful. And what do you find when people go through this energy work training? What are some of the bigger shifts or changes that are happening for them in their life or in their understanding or in their relationships?
So what I first experienced with people speaking at the time, the direct impact, them feeling things in the body. They didn't believe that, you know, energy could move in that way, that they could direct it. They were surprised that emotions could come up from doing different practices like opening or sharing heart energy, that old memories could come forward in those processes. In the last few years, it's been much easier to capture the information and feedback from people around. What did you gain most? What was changed for you? And I would say now that the most common thing around the energy journey is people feel and experience themselves different. There's like a part of them that because it's always there, but they were not aware of, or they were not in touch with, or they were not listening to. And that affects everything in our lives, like intimate relating. It's entwined in with the physical body and sexual energy. It's entwined in with the mind and work relationships. So people start to notice the energy between them, or their energetic response to others, or can sense changes in others and can find ways to kind of meet there. But mostly I think the biggest thing is I'm very cautious with the word healing, because I think as much as it's very important, I don't like to the idea that we're all so broken and need healing constantly forever, you know. But so this idea, which I think we are pretty whole, and you know, some things we need to come to terms with or express, but this sense of taking the whole body's energy system, the physical body, the emotional body, the energy body, which are all interlinked and interwoven, and being fully in that body and attached to that body, the physical body, the energy body, the emotional body, and being able to understand and hear the messages, which makes life everything, creativity, intimacy. I would even say, professional success, if you want to call it that, with what people are wanting to achieve in the world. And in order to become current with that, there is most often a clearing out, as there is with the emotional body, of past experiences, fears, things that have been held onto. The energy body also holds on to a number of those memories. So that sense of feeling lighter, that sense of having more sensation, that sense of being more connected, and that sense of probably having better intuition, which is quite heavily linked in my experience to the connection to our energy field and being able to pick things up, and people speak about the sixth sense, and I feel like there's a relationship there between those. And
Beautiful.
and a statement just popped into my head then, which was, use it or lose it. So with emotional body teaching and emotional energy movement practices that I share with people, I often parallel this to, if you had a physical muscle, you would not expect it to work if you didn't work it out, So, and when you need it, it's not in good shape. And so the same, I think, is true of the energy field. Like the more you attune it, the more you connect to it, the more you nurture it, the more you listen to it, then the better service it can have for you. Because it is part of you. We are energy beings, but nobody tells us that.
Brilliant. I love that. It's not a one and done situation. So I also want to speak about, you're also a shamanic breathwork facilitator, and these are two of your bigger bodies of work, is energy work and breathwork. I'm curious about the bridge or the connection between these two. How does energy work and how are breathwork connected for you? I'm sure there's a big important link there.
So breath moves the energy in us. So the two are intrinsically linked. The more you breathe, depending on which way you breathe, you can change the level of activation of your nervous system, but also of your energy field, of your energy channels inside, and of your energy field around you. So whenever you are breathing, and particularly if you're entering into breath work, you are engaging with the energy body and the physical body, usually to see what's there, primarily. Primarily, it's like okay, if I breathe and I connect with myself, and there's many different types of breath work. But in shamanic breath work, what we really want to access is to dive from the sympathetic nervous system into the parasympathetic nervous system, or the conscious awareness into the unconscious awareness. And the breath is a bridge to do that. The breath is one of the ways that you can shift and connect. Another way of doing that is eye blinking, which EMDR and many of the therapies used in psychotherapy now actually embrace these things. So breath bridges, and changing the breath can change that. So you can reach, you can access, you can bring down the resistance of, usually the resistance of the mind, in a way that allows older energy to move. And that might be through energy of heat, or the body moving, or of an emotion. For some people, they're very emotional. For some people, these things are very much sensations, kinesthetic in the body. For some people, it's very visual, like seeing, understanding, letting sort of stories and energy pass away. So for me, if we want to work with human beings and we want to access, to clear out and let go of the things we might be holding on to, and if we want to access the other parts of us that have been suppressed. So people often think breathwork is just about, getting rid of old, negative, difficult emotions, which can be a big important part for some people. But the other part is when we talk about the the golden shadow with Young, with all the parts of us that are suppressed and hidden, all our creative, loud, noisy, sexually adventurous parts of us. So another thing that can happen in breathwork is that those parts that were often very obviously or very subtly suppressed in childhood, those parts and those feelings can come through. And some breathwork, people are working with the body, with the emotions in this dimension only. And when you work with the way you work with shamanic breathwork, the intention is also to bring in the elements of soul, if people relate and connect to that, of ancestral pieces, to the DNA, which actually is very scientifically understood that we carry these things. So breathwork can be very physiological and somatic, in its presentation and in its experience. And it can also go into being, for many people, similar to plant medicine journeys. I mean, many people in breathwork sessions that I've held over the years have said, like, wow, I never thought I could have an experience like that without some form of, plant medicine or some other form of substance. So you are still conscious, you are still able to decide, unlike if you take a plant medicine, you're on the journey, there's no getting off. So in that way, breath work, till it's over. So in that way I like breath work, but that also makes breath work a little bit harder because the mind and the resistance to not going in that the plant medicine takes away can be stronger.
Yeah, something about your breathwork sessions are they're incredibly powerful rituals as well. And I've been in a breathwork session of yours, at least one, and heard people sharing like, whoa, she's holding a different space. There is a different portal that is opening up in Elaine's shamanic breathwork. And I'm curious if you could speak into a little bit about some of the important elements of how you hold and open that space and what you're looking for, what you're listening to, what you're tracking in the actual space as people deepen and go into the journey.
Yeah. Well, I would say that one of the biggest things is intention. So I'm setting a very conscious intention and I'm sharing that with people that this is what we're inviting in. So in some ways, the invitation is there. That alone doesn't always bring forward the trust. So there's a way of working with energetic fields that we create for groups for ritual. And this goes for breathwork rituals or sometimes other kinds of rituals with energy or sexuality-based rituals. But there's a particular energetic field that is created by the space holder in me in this instance. Now that field is an interesting thing because it's been 12 years in the maturing. When I first started, those fields and those experiences were different for many reasons. My way of understanding it is that the energy and the experiences and the trust and the power from all the previous sessions like shows up as a container by, when I start off, I always say the same introduction. I use the drum in a deliberate way. I use sage in a deliberate way. I call in the directions in a deliberate way. I relax people in the same way. And doing all of that is intending and bringing and opening. I also speak to people before about what might show up, but without too much detail to try not to project what the expectation is. The other thing that then happens is then people fall into that field and then they start to move their energy around that field. So the other thing that's important to do with energetic fields is to move that energy as it's created. And so I'm moving my body, I'm sounding, I'm having space holders sound. Sometimes we're using shakers, and sometimes we're using more Palo Santo or sage, which are elements that can affect the air in the space and also the individuals. And we're helping that energy through sound or through vibration or through physical things to move out. And people work in different ways with this. The way that I tend to work is that I primarily want people to move that energy themselves. I don't want to go doing things to people. Sometimes I would go if someone's having a big experience and support them a bit, but mostly people can move it. And then my way of closing that is then to take that energy, and usually there's like a large body of water or something close by, or sometimes it's a forest, but preferably some water. And at the end, as we close down, we say the same thing. We guide people back under the same guidance. We help them come back to their level of consciousness. And then we intend to leave what was there and clear the field of that energy. And I also get people to, you might remember, to create a little energetic bubble around themselves at the beginning, so they're kind of contained in that space and therefore less affected by, because some people have quite a lot of fear or are very affected by other people's energy or sounds. So, but underneath it all, you know, I have once or twice not had equipment, not had things, got into a room with a bunch of people with nothing, with no drum, with nothing, and created a space for people to go down, and quite often things still happen. But it gives it a framework, it gives it an opening, it gives it an exit, it contains it for those people. But I think the primary things that people experience are permission and holding, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I know also from knowing you that you have quite a your own breathwork practice. It's something that you do quite regularly. It's a primary practice for you. So I'm curious about that, how your own personal practice, both like how it's transformed today, how are you still doing shamanic breathwork yourself, and how your own personal practice is informing the way that you hold the groups that you hold.
Yeah, so in the beginning, I didn't even know what breathwork was when I lay down for my first session. I had no idea what I was in for. So it completely blew me away that my entire childhood passed in front of me, and truths that I never wanted to face were shown to me with such clarity. And I remember sitting up from that, and I still know the person now who held the session, and someone who was a space holder. I remember sitting up and going like, what the hell was that? You know? And they were like, yeah. And I think 20 days later, I was in Isis Cove with Starwolf, like doing a 28-day thing. I mean, it was just like, because I was such a strong-minded person. I had such a hold on my emotional body because quite a lot of difficult stuff had happened in my life and from an early age, and I'd had to learn to really contain that. And this just got underneath everything in a way that was terrifying and massively liberating at the same time. So I continued to do, because I understood that it's not a one-stop shop. Life still happens, you know. So if I want to stay connected and current, then I have to do, and I feel better. I feel clearer. I feel, you know, sometimes it's just about getting rid of some frustration, anger, fear. Sometimes it's actually, I'm asking myself, what do I want to do with my life? Am I still on the track for my purpose? Is there something I want to know? The other thing is that there's been an evolution. So at each stage in my life, initially with breathwork, I was dealing with deep family grief, ongoing family, really intense situations. So mostly I was clearing childhood stuff and then working with these big life events. And then over time, I started to feel like, oh, the creative parts come in. The more kind of visionary parts come in. Then as my being became more able to hold more multidimensional information, more subtle information, like, I think, you know, my mother finally passed last year. after 20 years of dementia. And so it was, I was doing breath work all around that time, before and after. And when I did the breath works before and after, I had for the first time a connection with female lineages on my grandmother's side, who were Irish Catholics, a lot going on about sexuality, a lot going on with witchcraft, a lot going on with curses and promises and soul contracts and things. And in those breath works at that time, this was what came through. And I wasn't ready to receive that earlier. It wasn't for me earlier. And it was so clear. Sometimes I feel like I'm doing this for myself. Sometimes I feel like particularly with these ancestral things, that there's something that I need to see and acknowledge that wasn't acknowledged on their behalf, on whoever's behalf, but there's something that wants to be known. And as as someone who also still is a scientist, there's a part of me that asks myself, am I making this up? Like, is this completely like fairy stories, and that's a deep inquiry for everyone to decide, but I don't feel I feel that I can sense and know and where am I in life? So the other thing, in the last few years, I've moved through menopause, and that makes all kinds of changes to how your third eye works and how your energy moves in your system, and to what information actually you need to be connected to through these different lineages. And it's a big feminine initiation, menopause, although it's more focused as a medical issue.
Wow, beautiful. I love this. I love how these practices are evolving with us and inform, like, your own personal practice is a part of that field that you hold, a part of that proficiency, a part of that depth, a part of that, many people only do breath work when they're in a held space because they're even scared to do it alone. And so to journey with someone who has such a comfort and a confidence of like, I'm just going to take myself here. I'm going to listen. I'm going to open. I'm going to receive. It shifts something in the trust and the safety of the space directly.
And I often do say, it can feel big and it can be big, but in my experience, out of I don't even know how many thousand people, it doesn't tend to give you more than you can be with. And I think this is another area where it does differ a little. I mean, I'm someone who has used plant medicine, who has got value from them, but I've used them very sparingly and only after I'd explored sexual energy rituals and breathwork rituals for a long time. So I'm not in any way anti. I see they have a huge gift to give to people. But what I would say is that sometimes people do get more than actually their energy field, their psychic field is able to deal with. And even though the breathwork journeys may feel big, it's very, very unusual for people to become split or scattered, because it's not people go, oh yeah, I'll just do a breathwork journey. Like, it can and does, and in the wrong hands and the wrong way at the wrong time for someone can really, really cause significant harm. So you may also remember from my session that I'm like, if you have had a significant psychotic event, if you have unstable bipolar, if you have certain things, this is not for you. We don't want to be attempting to help someone and then actually creating more issues. Now, of course, things can always happen. Something could always happen that we can't perceive, but you can screen people. I had a colleague and friend yesterday message me who's just been diagnosed with CPTSD and has been in many spaces for many years, is organizing events, and this is like news for them. And they're like, I've done breathwork with you. I've been told that could be good. Could we do some sessions? Because I never managed to get into an altered state in any other breathwork sessions. And I messaged him back and asked a little more about what and how and the nature of it. And I said, actually, I don't think this is the right thing for you right now, and he said, if you can't could you provide something else? And I ended up recommending a different type of breath work that's done in a conscious awareness breath work as a trauma release exercise. So it can be done when they do like conscious titration and pendulation and meet the things. And I also recommended a good friend of ours who's a nervous system coach to go and do some basic nervous system work first. So I think that's the other thing. It's really important as facilitators and things, just because we can offer something, and even if people really want it, we do have to be mindful. It's, you know, I remember someone saying to me once in a group, well, this must feel like not anywhere near as needing as much responsibility as when you used to see patients and, you know, tell them they have a DVT or they don't, or they, you know, there's a possible save of limb, or there's no option, there's an amputation option, because this is just working with breath and the body and touch, you know, and I'm like, no, this can, you know, is equally able to cause major harm to people if it's the wrong way, the wrong time.
Yeah. What you're speaking to right now is also one of the things, well, that I deeply appreciate about you, but also that you have one of the most impeccable reputations. And when people really, when they speak about you and recommend you, they do it at a really high level of integrity and safety in your space. And it's rare, and it's like very, very well deserved. And I'm curious, like, what you feel, what gave you that? There's a solidity and a confidence and a unwavering way that you hold yourself and deeply trust your intuition and your knowing and guide people in a way that's very clear, but also spacious. And is this just like how you've been, or is there something you would credit with this inner knowing?
So thank you for your question around this piece of safety and heldness and integrity. And it's something that I've been deeply curious about. The more years it's gone on, the more I become curious. You know, if I'm honest, when I first started, I found it a very great compliment, a very kind of affirming piece, you know, and then I went through a phase of thinking, am I overconfident? You know, people are saying that I never get shaken by anything. Should I be more shaken than I am? And then I started realizing where it is a service. So sometimes it's a big service because people can drop into deep experiences. But then I realized, there's also a shadow piece in this potentially for me and for the group, whereby there can be a part of me going, oh yes, isn't this great? And the part of the ego that likes to think that we're so great. So you have to really, I've been aware since I got past my initial learnings, you know, to really not allow that to get into an ego trap about that, firstly, and to see that it's helpful, but also to see where there could be a real outsourcing of responsibility from individuals to me, like the projection of that onto me, and so I got very curious, you know, the last few years, what is happening with that? Because I could also feel where it's a benefit. People can drop into deep experiences. People trust themselves to go to places, and where is their trust in themselves? Where might they override themselves because they think, oh, if you say it must be okay? Where could I possibly take groups further than than I should because of that. You know, there was a phase a decade ago where people were moving with big intensity, and I think it was also needed, but like, where is that sometimes too much for some people's systems? And so the one of the conclusions I came to in the last few years was a few things are important. One, why do people feel this, and why do I feel this? And I realized that I inherently, wisely or not, I inherently feel very safe in my body. I think people feel that. I think it's a transmission of an energy that their nervous system can sense. So I think that's one thing. Where the other interesting pondering I've had is around human design systems. So, and I used to think all of these things were nonsense. You know, I spent my whole life like just being proved I was wrong about almost everything I ever believed. So I now, quite some time ago, but met a human design person, and in that model, I'm a reflector. And so one of the things in that model, and he said, actually, you're not too crazy considering, because some people who are reflectors get very mixed up by what's theirs and what's other people's. But what it does is it allows me to reflect back to people themselves. And so in the last few years of doing groups, I've often shared with people, like, if you feel like you have this great sense of safety and groundedness that you feel I'm giving you, I'm really inviting you to feel and to know that my system is such that one of my things that I do without even thinking about it is I reflect people back to themselves. Sometimes in ways that feel good, and sometimes perhaps in ways that don't feel good. So I don't think we have to find reasons for everything, but I do think there is something in that. And I also feel it's empowering on a couple of trainings where I felt very much almost like this, people giving me too much of the power. I want to try and give it back. And particularly at the end of trainings, I would say, okay, you've agreed to be held by me for this week and everything else. And you think all these feelings of safety and trust are coming from the space I'm creating, but I'm really inviting you to know that that is you. And just the circumstances were just set up for you to be able to experience yourself in that way. But it's not just down to me. This is something that you are capable of and that you have in yourself. So that's been my journey with that kind of thing that is a gift. And also I think I have to watch, and participants have to watch, not to then lose their own sense of what's right for them in that moment.
So amazing. This is such an alive topic for me right now, around power and giving power away, and the dance of how that happens. It's like, I've been in both positions. I've been in the position where people are giving their power away to me, and I'm like, why are you doing that? I didn't do anything to contribute to that. I didn't ask for that. I don't want that. But it's like, just inherently in the goodness of holding a safe space, I'm creating the perfect conditions for people to do that. And then I've been on the other end where I'm in the space with someone and I'm like, here's my power, take it. You can hold it so much better. And so I've really seen it. And so I love that you're speaking to that it's such a gift. And there's also a shadow and a blind spot there that we have to track and be even more discerning about, and how we show up and how we continue to give the power back.
Yeah.
And not keep staying in that role of overprotecting and over caretaking and making sure the space is so safe that people unconsciously release their own inner guidance and knowing.
Yes, power, we have to really be examining our own position with power, either our fear of it or our hunger or our need for it or whatever, and we really need to be looking at the over caretaking piece. And one thing I saw commonly with trainee facilitators for years was, if someone in the group is going through an experience that is their wound, how easily it is for them to get caught up in the protecting them, like trying to save them from the situation that they couldn't save themselves from. And it's because it's not coming from a clear, aligned place, it often ends up being in a distortion. So where do we, create enough safety, but not so much that people switch off the part of their brain that needs to think what's right for them in that moment? Where do we hold the power to allow us to take people on a journey, but not take people's power away? And where do we look for the part of us that's trying to save ourselves from the past or other people in our life that we couldn't save? And it's a classic one where, often I've held so many groups where, and this just happens to be one that's more common in female-bodied people in my experience, where, someone is going through not being comfortable, potentially a participant's being challenged, not sure what to do. And then, a system will come and say, oh, I think they're in this, they're in freeze, they're in this, and we need to do something, we need to stop, and it comes from a place of care, and it comes from a place of feeling something that feels really real. But it's like, okay, stop for a moment, check in, how much of this is yours, go clear yourself, so knowing our own vulnerability points.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good one. And it's really confronting. How am I even unconsciously treating people different based off of my own judgments and assumptions and preferences?
Yeah. And who can I relate to? I mean, both you and I work in the international, space where people come from different cultures. And I've worked with people from many, many different cultures and many different languages. And like, where is this a cultural thing that I don't quite get them or they don't quite get me? And where do I not relate to these people, and where can I relate more to these people? And of course, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, we're human, but we just need to have an awareness of like, who are the people that will find it super easy to come to me and ask me if it's an issue, and who are the people that will never come to me, and actually I have to watch them, or I have to not presume. And the other piece, which both you and I know amongst many others, pondering the whole fawning situation in the space, and how power and role affects that, and how much so many human beings were still trained to do that, and how do we spot that, particularly in light of our own lens of who we think we connect with, or who we see, or how we see other participants.
Yeah. It brings me to a funny, I've lived in Europe for 10 years, and it's where most of my facilitation has happened. And I've gone through my own process of what it means to be an American living in Europe, and was really for a long time trying to like wash the American off me. And so for that time, I remember as Americans would come into my groups, I'd be like, oh, it's an American, and they're so American, and they have all those American quirks. And it's really sweet for me now to be on a different side where I'm like, oh, an American, like I get them. We're the same. Like I know you. And so just seeing how my own relationship to myself and those parts of me is reflected in the space I hold and how I'm able to receive people. It's a kind of lighter version of what we're talking about. Even just people from our country or not.
I remember someone very wise years ago in America. Actually, I was working at a summer camp in Maine, and I was like 21, and I somehow there was this woman there who I was cooking as a chef and teaching that time ecological sciences. And this woman was there, and we somehow got on, and she was super wise. And one of the things she was saying to me was, she was the first person to say to me the idea that, when you really like people, it's because they're reflecting the things that you like about yourself. And when you really don't like someone, it's, and I'm super grateful to her at that point in my life that I had that awareness, which I had no awareness of up until that point at all. So now that's always my first question whenever anyone annoys me anywhere in life. It's like, okay, where am I in this?
Beautiful. I know you're on sabbatical now and taking a really beautiful, nourishing year or 6 months off. And you just mentioned you have a private or group mentorship coming up. But if people wanted to work with you, what are some of the other ways they can work with you, and what is your work most devoted to in the world right now?
Well, this is part of the question that I'm wondering what the answer is going to be. And I think I'm getting a little clearer. So for many years, I worked one-to-one. I did workshops, days and weekends. And then for the last probably 6 or more years, I focused solely on 7-day retreats, sometimes 14 days, and then festivals. And I'm in this part of this being off and redesigning my life and age and travel and how much I want to do it. My sense is that I will be offering sessions again, one-to-one sessions again, in person, online, a limited number. So if people are interested when I restart, that might be a possibility, which it hasn't been for years. And I've had a lot of people ask me, but quite frankly, I was traveling too much and I was way too busy to really work with people one-to-one in the depth that I would want to, which is why I stopped doing that. The other thing that I'm planning to do is to do more 1-day and 2-day things for a few reasons, for my own energetic system, but also I can see where, and this is why I continue to do festivals, where some people don't have a week or the money or the time or the opportunity to go and commit, or they don't feel comfortable to commit to a 7-day journey. So you can reach more people who have less experience by doing those things. So I will be starting to do some of those. And then I will continue to do the 7-day journeys, which I do around breath and pleasure and energy, and this mentorship program for facilitators. So I'm also toying. I mean, you and I had a shared experience in the field, which I'm super grateful for. And I'm also feeling like it became clear to me then, okay, I want to do 1-week chunks of very specialist facilitation in niche areas. So it looks like that might be born next year in some form, around the topics of holding sexuality-based rituals, around the topics of holding temples. So that's some of the things that I'm imagining I'll be doing either later this year or in 2026. So they can, if people join my mailing list on my website, then everything that I do, I will send out via the mailing list. So that's where to find me.
Amazing. I'm like amazed that we didn't even get into your pleasure and sexuality groups and work, but to be continued. We can always do follow-up interviews, and I just want to say thank you so much for taking a very short pause from your retreat and nourishment of yourself and having this conversation with me. It's been really a pleasure.